Welcome to the Real Turf Techs podcast for the technician that wants to get real. Follow along as we talk to industry professionals and address hot topics that we all face. Along the way, we'll learn tips and tricks. I'm your host, Trent Manning. Let's have some fun. Welcome to the Real Turf Techs podcast, episode 136. On this episode, we're thrilled to welcome a true legend in the turf industry, Jim Nedin. With over 6 decades of experience, Jim's journey began at the age of 9 working in a lawnmower shop and has grown into an extraordinary career that spans from repairing mowers to educating turf professionals worldwide. A mechanical engineer with a passion for innovation, Jim has not only influenced the way turf equipment is maintained, but has also played a pivotal role in shaping training programs for technicians. His insight into cutting unit maintenance, reel design, and the art of precision turf management are unparalleled. Get ready to dive into a lifetime of knowledge, stories, and valuable tips from a genuine industry icon. Let's get real with Jim Nedin. Welcome, Jim, to the Real Turf Techs podcast. Thanks for coming on. I really looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Trent. I know we've kind of missed paths a few times in trying to connect, and life kind of gets in the way sometimes, but I'm very, very glad to be here.
Oh, no, thank you so much for being here. And I need to say something to GCSAA because they have us scheduled speaking at the same time show every year. And I mean, it's tough. I don't know, I want to come by and see you, and then I don't get to, we're busy going in different directions. Well, tell us how you got into the turf industry.
Oh my goodness. Well, this is, I guess, my 62nd year in doing this to some degree.
Yeah.
I got into the industry of repairing mowers. I mean, my father was a mechanical engineer, so he had a lot of connections. But he had a friend who owned a lawnmower shop. And at the age of 9, he asked his friend if he wouldn't mind having me learn. So in the summer and on weekends, pay me $10 a week.
And nice.
I broke more things than I fixed, probably. But at the age of 12, my father again knew someone who belonged to a country club. And they were actually looking for someone to repair their golf carts. And they were Cushman 3-wheel golf carts with owning engines in. I mean, they were really back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. So they took a chance on me. And, so I gave it my best. And my father would actually work with me on a Saturday and taught me how to keep record keeping on like 3x5 index cards, change the points in this unit and on and on. So got everything kind of up and running. And the superintendent said to me, I guess I was about 13 then, hey, we have some equipment done in the barn, and there were barns back then that, needed repairing. And, did I want to see, if I could help out? So I went down and I did learn about reel mowers working at the lawnmower shop. I ground some mowers and so on and so forth at the age of 9 and 10 and whatnot. But so I knew cutting units a little bit, but not to the level of a golf course, But so I putzed and got things up and going, and as time passed, I was now operating a Worthington tractor pulling dang mowers and learning irrigation. And back then it wasn't automatic irrigation; it was all, kind of quick, stick it in the ground and the flippers on the large sprinklers and whatnot. So that's how I kind of got into the business way back when, and I had some really good mentors along the way.
Did you like to play golf or anything
I used to play golf quite a bit, but as life gets in the way again with 2 hips replaced and bad knees, I need a shoulder replacement. I've had 2 artificial discs, put in my back. So I haven't played golf in probably 7 or 8 years, but when I was a superintendent, and so it led me into becoming a superintendent. I used to play golf probably 2-3 times a week in the evenings and so on. So I really enjoyed it. Never was really great at it, but I enjoyed it, just enjoyed being out. So that's how I kind of got into the business through affiliation, through my father's affiliations and so on and so forth. And headed down that path and never really thought I would be doing that. And as time went on, I got a degree in engineering and a degree in business. Never really got a degree in turf. However, I did teach at some of the turf universities at Penn State and
Yep.
Delhi and so on for short periods of time. But I was always very, very interested in turf and always, went Penn State's, field days and different things like that. And became a superintendent, school of hard knocks, if you will.
Yeah. I understand that. That's how I became a mechanic.
Yeah.
At a golf course was
Sure.
hard knocks. And I mean, I did have a good mentor along the way, but I learned a lot by trial and error.
Sure. We all do.
I think a lot of us learn that way. What kind of grinder were you using when you were 9, 10 years old?
Oh my gosh. We're using a hook grinder. And I don't even know if you're familiar with that. Was it called? It was an SIP hook grinder. And
Okay.
so SIP, that name goes way back. And that was Simplex, Ideal, and Peerless. And Simplex made the lapping machine, Ideal made the bed knife grinder, and Peerless made the reel grinder. So that's where that name, kind of all came together with those three companies. But so I was using a hook grinder. So the way a hook grinder operated was that you ground the bed knife and then you reinstalled it on the cutting unit and you left a little gap between the reel and the bed knife itself, about maybe 1/8 of an inch. And so a hook would go underneath the bed knife. And then you also had a guide that went against the reel blade. And so it was spring loaded. So the hook was spring loaded against the bed knife. So the cutting unit would go in upside down. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So the head with the hook on was pulling up on the bed knife and the guide was holding the blade in position. So however the bed knife was ground, the reel blade followed its exact same likeness.
Okay.
So you hooked it in, you pulled it across, it popped out, you went back, you hooked it in, you came across. And so I had some trials, I guess you could say, whenever I was young. The very first mower I ground, first of all, this gentleman, his name was Felix Palmieri, and he was an immigrant from Italy, and he owned a lawnmower shop, and he would chase me around with a broom because I broke more things than I fixed, but so this customer brings in this little lawnmower, a little push reel type mower, an American or whatever the brand name was. But he said it needed sharpening. So Felix says, "Here, I showed you, go ahead and sharpen the mower and I'll show you how to hook the reel grinder." He showed me how to grind bed knives. So he came over and showed me how to hook up the mower in the reel grinder. So I ground it, and he says, "Whatever you do, make sure the blades don't turn blue. Whatever you do, So I'm grinding, I'm seeing blue. I'm like, "Oh, this is not good," So at any rate, I ground the mower and I put it back together. The doggone things, I'm pushing it, and it's going click, 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 click across the floor. And I don't know what's wrong with this thing. So Felix says to me, "Did you put soap on the blades?" I look at him and says, "Soap?" He goes, "Yeah, go in the bathroom and get a bar of soap, put soap on the blades. You need to lubricate the blades." I'm like, "Okay." So I put soap on the blades and push it. It just seemed a little bit better. So anyways, he calls the guy comes and picks up the mower. And the guy comes back in probably about an hour, says, "I can't even push this." And I ask him, "Did you put soap on the blades?" And the guy looks at me cross-eyed and says, "What? I've owned this mower for years. What are you talking about? Soap? And I put soap on the blades, lubricate it." So he says, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do that." So anyways, he drops it back off. Felix says, "Sharpen it again." I go and sharpen it again. I'm watching to make sure the blades aren't turning blue and all that good stuff. Put it back together. Seemed like it was a little bit better. Put soap on the blades. Called the guy, and he comes and picks it up. He's pushing this, it's a little better. And about an hour later, or maybe the next day, I don't recall, he brings it back, and Felix says, I'm going to help you with this. Let's take it apart. Take it apart. Here, the real bearings were shot. I mean, that reel was moving up and down, probably a good 1/8 of an inch up and down. So new real bearings in, resharpened it, and everything was good. So, I mean, that's really learning by trial and error, right? You know?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's crazy.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, you can't make that up, I don't think.
No.
No, that's good stuff.
Lots of stories in all my life doing this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. And we got an hour and a half. So we can get in as many stories as you want because I love them. I mean, I do. I like hearing the stories. I mean, it's fun.
I've always enjoyed, presenting to your association. That's always been a treat,
Oh, yeah. 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 How many years have you presented at the National Association?
Oh my goodness. I think I started in probably 82.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, back then it was more sprayers, to be quite honest with you. Back in 1982, I was contacted by the GCSAA. There was a gentleman by the name of Alan Hayes that worked for the GCSAA, and he was putting together a certification program for a spray technician. And I was known in the Western Pennsylvania area for conducting seminars and working with the Department of Agriculture and so on and so forth to train spray applicators. And so I was contacted by Alan Hayes, and he said, "Hey, would you like to partner with me to train, spray applicators?" And so he sent me what he was working on, and we worked on it together then to finalize the program. But I took basically the eastern half of the country, and he took the western half of the country, and we did chapter meetings back then, and would fly in and spend a day and go over all the calculations and calibrations and different things like that, and then actually do it hands-on on the sprayer, and then recertify the technician. So we did that for a number of years. So that started back in 1982.
So was that like a 1-day training
like
type thing?
one day, right?
Okay.
So one long day, exactly.
No, yeah, long day. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
And then I got involved with them doing like small engine repair and so on and so forth, and cutting units as well. So I would just take an arsenal of stuff with me and pallets of cutting units and engines half torn down and whatever. So we got into a whole lot of that hands-on kind of stuff, and it kind of, it was more about the technician at that point in time and kind of getting away from the spray application. So it was more the mechanics of how things work.
Yeah. Who were you working for at that time?
I was working for a distributor in Pittsburgh called H. Griffith. There was a Toro distributor. So I spent 22 years there as their service manager. And so I came from being a superintendent, and I joined that team under a little bit of false pretenses, actually. Back then, there wasn't any type of, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't cell phones, anything like that, right? So I was a superintendent in Eastern Pennsylvania, and my wife didn't like it out in the country so much, more city. Right? So always pestering me to get back into the city, but I loved what I was doing. And so a salesman who actually is one of my great mentors named Merle Smith from E.H. Griffith would call on me, and we would get to talking, and he would say, hey, the service manager is going to retire from E.H. Griffith at some point. You might want to consider that. I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? I'm a superintendent. He says, well, I know, you're working on a mechanical engineering degree. I know you have a business degree. and all these different things. So he kept,
Mm-hmm.
after me about that. So I applied for the job. And first, I made a mistake of telling my wife, and she says, "You're going to take that job." And I said, "I haven't even applied for it. I don't even know if,
Right.
I'm eligible." But at any rate, I took the job. But in my mind, I thought, if I get back in the Pittsburgh area, working at a distributorship, I can then connect with superintendents and understand what's going on in that market. And then I can find a superintendent's job.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, 22 years later, I was still in the same seat, but I enjoyed it. So I started to do some videos. The distributor that I worked for also was a Panasonic distributor. So they had, the
Mm-hmm.
camcorders and all those things. So we started to do in-house training for customers on video. How to change a throttle cable on a greens mower, how to change a steering cable. I don't know if you remember the good old greens mowers that had the steering cables down
Mm.
through the tubes
Okay.
and
Yeah.
arm
Yeah.
and all those kind of things. So we were doing those kind of things. And like when a customer would call and be perplexed or whatever, just send them a VCR, send them a tape.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, so
I mean,
Rich,
y'all were way ahead of your time
I
then,
guess,
you
I don't
know? I
know.
mean,
So Rich Smith at Toro, he was the training manager at Toro. I would go to their, seminars every year and so on and so forth. And we got to talking about that. And he's like, "Wow, would you want to come up and start to do some videos for us, some training videos?" Well, let me see if that could work through the distributorship. And of course it could work. So
mhm.
I did that. I, visited a few times, and now all of a sudden, I'm going to be hired. I'm going to be farmed out from the distributor land to Toro as far as a trainer and a field operations manager. I was the first field operations manager that Toro hired, and that was in the mid 90s. Now, kind of fast forward here a little bit.
Mhm.
But so my position was to go out and help customers with product, help distributors, train customers. And also there was a business element to that too, to help our distributor service departments become more business-like. As far
Mhm.
as now today, they have what they call SRTs, which are standard repair times, which it came from automotive. So that if you were a customer or distributor in Colorado, let's say, and it took an hour to do something and they charged you for an hour, right? And now you as a superintendent moved to another part of the country and you went to a Toro distributor and the same job, they're charging you 3 hours to do, right?
Mhm.
So the standard repair time says, no, this is what it takes and this is what you need to charge. If it's taking you 3 hours to do an hour job, you need to be better trained, you need to have better tools, you need to have a better environment, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
to get yourself up to that standard. So all Toro distributors utilize SRTs now as far as the standard repair time. So it's fair for the customer then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
And it
Mhm.
helps the distributor improve because then they will achieve, you know, better marks, if you will, by doing a better job and, you know, be trained better so there's less comebacks and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So I got into the business element as well. So I did a lot of work with Toro service business. So
Are they
yep.
still doing that with distributors?
I work with one distributor. I had 4 distributors that I had in my own business.
Mhm.
So I'm still a vendor contractor of Toro, meaning that, they can hire me to do things. And sometimes they do. And I was a consultant for 3 Toro distributorships from 2003 to somewhere in there. And so now I have one that's in the northeastern part of the US, but I have an annual contract. So I do training with those folks, ride along with the sales guys, do business with those folks. So in 2003, I started my own consulting business with the blessing of Toro, and it happened to be with 3 Toro distributors. Now, with that, with those contracts, if you will, I still had the option of doing my own thing with private golf courses. So I
Okay.
still
Yep.
work with private golf courses. Typically, I'll have a half a dozen golf courses that I'll visit every year in the summer, for a day or two, that sort of thing, and just kind of brush up on things and help if there's a new technician on board, maybe I'll spend more time, a few more days, those kind of things. So I
Mm-hmm.
do still travel quite a bit. I was in Victoria and Vancouver, Canada for several trips this past summer. And
Okay.
I was in Victoria for their annual conference just in December. And then I was there last December as well. So I still, the age of 72, I still get
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's awesome. That's good stuff. And I'm sure it's rewarding getting to
Yes. Yes.
help other individuals out.
Well, there's a lot of younger technicians in the marketplace today, and I'm happy and privileged to be able to help them. When I get a call from a superintendent that I don't even know and he says, I heard you were training these technicians at this association or whatever the case might be. Would you be interested in wherever it might be, coming down to Florida or, California or wherever to
Mm-hmm.
spend a few days and, see if it fits my schedule and I'm up to it. Absolutely. So
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. A lot of fun. For sure. What's your favorite tool? You got a favorite tool?
my favorite tool, I I think there's a couple of them. One is a depth gauge, a Vermeer caliper, if you know what that is, a
Okay.
digital
Yep.
Vermeer caliper. And the
Yep.
other is a torque wrench.
Oh,
Because
okay.
yes, because and I really drive this home when in my training, like on the hands-on portion, like a lot of times I'll do like a day formal classroom, and then the next day will be all hands-on in the shop. Make sure that they have cutting units or sprayers or aerators or whatever the case might be to really get our hands dirty, if you will. But and people are always kind of amazed at me because I pull these torque specs off the top of my head,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, I've been doing it so long. It's kind of like everything has a torque spec. I mean, when you build or design or manufacture something, it has a torque spec.
Yeah.
And so, a bend knife screw at 220 inch-pounds is that's torque for a specific reason. Or, 100 inch-pounds if it's John Deere or Jacobson. It's torque for a
Mm-hmm.
specific reason. And so if you're doing it 6 burps on your air gun, I have no idea what that is. Or you're
Yep.
still using the hammer and the chisel or hammer and the center punch to tighten
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep.
bend knife screw. I have no idea what that is. But, the bend knives are so thin today that you've got to be pretty accurate and consistent with the torquing of those screws so that you don't wind up causing some distress to the bed knife in some way that you didn't expect, So, whenever you start to have noises and different things like that coming off of the reel and the bed knife, whenever they're intersecting, then you get the harmonics, and harmonics causes vibration. Vibration sometimes causes expansion, and now you have a rifled reel or a bed knife. So that's why I believe in torquing. You know, everything has a torque. So
Okay. Yeah.
but
Nothing wrong with that.
that's my favorite tool. Inch pound, foot pound. The depth gauge is my favorite tool because it's a simple, easy way to measure the diameter of a reel. So, I mean, if you think about it, let's say a 5-inch reel. Now, Toro makes their reels at 5 inches and 60 thousandths, a little bit
Yep.
over, right? But you take a 5-inch reel to understand the diameter of that reel. you have to know the axle size, right? The shaft size.
Mm-hmm.
The Toro over the years has made, well, they made 4 different shaft size over the years. They made typically a 1 1/8 inch shaft. That was a solid shaft on the greens mower. And then they made a 1 1/4 inch shaft. That was very short lived. That was like with 70-inch pros and 84 pros. Probably haven't never heard of those.
Okay.
But then they made the 1 3/8 shaft, which was a hollow shaft. And today they make a 1 5/16 inch shaft. That's the one that's machined on the ends.
Okay.
The last quadrant is machined. So that's 1 5/16. So if you do the decimal, that'll take.
I'm writing this down.
5 divided into 16 will give you the metric or the decimal, right? So John Deere uses a 1 inch shaft,
Mm-hmm.
and Jacobson uses a 15 16 inch shaft, right? 15 16.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
So
I'm
if you
getting
know
all
the
kind of
shaft
specs
sizes,
here.
yeah, if you know the shaft sizes, then you just take your depth gauge and go from the tip of the blade down to the shaft, multiply that by 2, add the shaft back in, gives you the size of the reel. And
Yep.
also to measure a tapered reel very quickly and easily, you do that same thing. I'll drop the digital depth gauge in, zero it out whenever it touches on the shaft, and then go over the other side and see if it's positive or negative, right? So that'll tell you what way that reel is tapered. So
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Makes
so it's
total
just
sense.
simple and easy, and do it. You don't take anything apart. Pretty much quick down and dirty.
Mm-hmm.
So I've used that for years and years and years. Just the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple.
Yeah. Keep it
Right.
simple. So does Toro start out with a 1 3/8 shaft and then they machine it down to the 1 5/16 to
Yeah,
get their datum?
yeah. Machined
Okay.
on the ends. Yeah, it's
On the
still
ends.
it's still the hollow shaft. The deep
Mm-hmm.
groove on the left-hand side stands for left-hand internal threads, and no groove on the other side stands for right-hand internal threads. So
Oh,
whenever
okay.
you're putting a fixture or an attachment on, I always point out that deep groove means it's left-handed thread internal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's
And so they went to the hollow shaft. One, it lightened the reel up as far as the reel itself. And 2, the older shafts, the originals were, were solid shafts. So they had to come up with a way to come up with an adapter to go on the solid shaft outer thread to drive a belt or something.
right.
Yeah, for groomers or
Mm-hmm.
rear roller brushes, those kind of things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'd seen the groove on one side and not on the other, but I had no idea
Yeah,
why they were doing that.
yeah, it's left-handed
Yeah.
internal. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. What other kind of trade secrets that you can let out of the bag here
Well,
like that? I mean, and I'm sure it's not a trade secret. It looks like that's something that they would let end users know.
right, right. Well, I mean, I think anything like that you can probably find somewhere in the archives or somewhere, if you search it out enough. But since I've been so intimately involved with Toro, I know that you had Jerry Goman on. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
maybe your last time. Very dear friend of mine. Great guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Back in September,
Yeah.
or his episode released in September. Yeah, he was great.
Right.
I love Jerry.
Yeah. He's just always so casual and just so bright, So I've always enjoyed working with Jerry. But, there's just so many things that I listened intently to his podcast with you. And, he's always so smooth, and
Oh yeah,
always so
yeah.
active. Yeah, we started talking about different bed knives and different things like that. I always found it really interesting. So Jacobson, they make one extended bed knife. It's 80 thousandths longer, if you will.
Okay.
The cutting edges to the center line. And John Deere makes 2. They make one at 40 and one at E. So, and Toro only makes one. And that's 200 thousandths. So if we look at that in degrees, Jacobson has one, which is 2 degrees, which is 80 thousandths.
Mm-hmm.
John Deere has 2, which is 2 degrees and 4 degrees. And then Toro makes only 1, 5 degrees. So people always kind of say, well, why does Toro only make 1? Well, the attitude spacers, attitude, but the spacers that change the behind the center line in the back on the deep cutting units are equal to 2.5 degrees. So every time you insert a spacer, it either increases or decreases the behind the center line by 2.5 degrees. So by using one bed knife at 5 degrees and then using complementary number of spacers, you can get there by going 2.5 degrees at a clip. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah.
So the spacers are 2.5, the bed knife's 5. So
Yeah. And so I'm sure this is out here somewhere, but where could an individual find this information?
I mean, it certainly should be available in a manual.
It should be,
Service
but I don't.
manual, operator's manual.
I've looked and looked,
Yeah.
and I've not been successful at finding this stuff.
You know, me being so close to engineering all the time and working with engineering and having some great guys like Jerry Goldman and so on, Scott Kaufman, I think Jerry mentioned Scott Kaufman. Scott Kaufman is the designer of cutting units, really, really good guy. But also, you know, since I'm independent, I know John Deere and I know Jacobson as well, and, you know, some of those engineers and so on. So, you know, when I do get cut, I still bleed red. So, but it's
right.
me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my objective has always been when working with private golf courses, my objective is to help you do the best that you can with what you've got. I don't care if it's
for sure.
red, blue, green, purple, white, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, it's to help you do the best. So having said that, it's always been good to be connected with the industry and the people who work within the industry, you know, whether decide that kind of thing.
Right.
So, but having said that, I've done a lot of calculations and measurements on my own over the years, of course, because I was a field guy, right? So, you know, just always kind of kid the guys in experimental and so forth. They would be doing a lot of things on CAD and so forth and having like the cutting units cutting grass and so on. I said, that's a nice cartoon. You got to come with me, you know? So
Yeah.
the real world. And they would, you know, I had a lot of times I had engineers come with me on the road and then we'd do some discovery and so on. But so the things that you're asking me, they should be available and maybe they're deep within the archives of somewhere, but those spacers, that's half of what the extended bed knife is. So the extended bed knife actually came about from European market, over in the European market where greens are very, very, like in England where it's always humid, or not humid, but moist, you know, kind of damp, a lot of gouging and so on and so forth. So that 5-degree extended bed knife actually started over there, and it kind of migrated into the, you know, the use over in the US. And whenever this flex cutting unit came out, we started to have issues with the flexes as far as them being too aggressive and gouging and so on. So
hold up on that. On the first flex, did it have the aggressive bed bar before it was painted black?
So here's how you know, the aggressive bed bar it's probably still out there. I think it's still being sold, but it's going to be obsoleted because of the spacers. So the aggressive bed bar, the standard bed bar, let's see, there was only one bed bar. So it was a standard bed bar, right?
Okay.
And so then they in 2006 came out with an aggressive bed bar, and it was painted black. And the black bed bar had a chamfer in the left ear of the adjuster, so that you knew that it was an aggressive bed bar. The aggressive bed bar is exactly 100 thousandths. The bed knife screws are pulled back 100 thousandths further back than the standard bed bar. So that's 2.5 degrees. So the spacers do exactly the same thing as putting an aggressive bed bar on and readjusting the spacers to X, right? Or using an extended bed knife and then putting spacers in. So you can get there in a much simpler fashion and much less expensive fashion, because aggressive bed bar is probably $300, $400.
Yeah.
Spacer is $20, $25, whatever the case might be. So, and so you can put an extended bed knife on and then change it up with the spacers, which takes that 5 degrees and cuts it in half. So we find many different purposes, but we used to use what we used to do is use the aggressive bed bar with an extended bed knife. So a cutting unit, basically, all cutting units, Greensmore cutting units out of the factory, they use a benchmark of 125 thousandths height of cut. So their measurements were that bed knife cutting edges, your aggression fork, that measures that. So the bottom of the bed knife may or may not equal where that cutting unit edge is. Okay. So like if I take a John Deere and I set it up to 4.5 degrees, I will not get a 4.5 degrees differential from the bottom of the bed knife to the roller plane. The word, if I put the digital protractor on the bottom of the bed knife and don't move the cutting unit, and now take it and take a measurement and then put it on the roller plane and take that measurement, basically what you're doing with your aggressive fork, right? So, but we're using the bottom of the bed knife. So I'll get a different measurement. That 4.5 degrees behind the center line may measure 8 degrees on the bottom of the bed knife. So that's null and void. However, Toro's products with their deep cutting units, I used the aggression fork when I was in Victoria, Canada. And I used it on a Toro Greensmore. And so whenever we take the 125 thousandths as a benchmark, basically, if I'm using a micro Greensmore bed knife and I draw it up to where it's going to make light contact with a new reel, right? And I go across the roller plane, don't move the cutting unit, and take a measurement with the digital protractor, and then drop that digital protractor, zero dot, drop it then on the bottom of the bed, I will yield somewhere around 4.5 degrees. All right. And that's standard. However, the bottom of that bed knife equals the distance behind the center line. That holds true. So whenever I used your aggression fork, I did that same thing. And it was probably within, I think it was like 4.65. And when I did it across the bed knife, it was like 4.6. So extremely close. It was not even worth talking about. And so what we always say is, when you're going to do that, if you do it with a Toro, you want to use a new bed knife, because as the bed knife wears, it's going to change its angle from the bottom. The aggressiveness is not going to change, but the bottom of the bed knife is going to arc a little differently as it's going to touch the reel. So whenever you are going to use that as a measurement. So that's something that we've kind of touted for years. The bottom of the bed knife is equal to the distance behind the center line using a new bed knife. So with a micro, so I was very excited to see that the numbers that I drew up from the aggression fork and the Toro principle they weren't even worth talking about. They were so close.
No, that
So,
is awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
So cool.
However,
And I do
different
think what,
different manufacturers that cannot be applied as far as the bottom of the bed knife giving you the accurate measurement from the distance behind center
Yeah.
of the cutting
And
edge.
then I think the other confusing thing that a lot of people don't understand is, I think a lot of us, including me, were taught that you measure your attitude, just like we were talking about. So your base plane on the rollers being 0, and measure the angle of the bed knife, and that's our attitude. And if that gets more aggressive, our cut is more aggressive. And if it gets less aggressive, our cut's less aggressive. And that's not always true. And I think it's really misleading too when you add an extended bed knife. Because just for instance, on the Toro with a standard bed bar, and you're 4.5 degrees behind center line, but you put on the extended knife and you're actually in front of center by a little bit, but your attitude doesn't change that much.
Right. The bottom of the bed knife stays the same. Okay. But so with the Toro bed knife, they use the exact same bed knife, whether it's extended or standard. They just push the holes back in the bed knife by 200 thousandths. It's like 191 thousandths. So I always say 200, just keep it simple. But so that's 5 degrees. So we're pushing now the bed knife ahead by 5 degrees. So that kind of creates a can of worms how you grind that bed knife as well, because you can't use the standard early days, and I still use this. The front of the bed knife is 15, the top of the bed knife is 5. Just keep it simple. I know that you get this matrix, it's like 14 plus 2 minus 3, whatever. It's like, forget about it. 15 in the front and it's 5 on the top. However, when you use an extended bed knife, because now you push the cutting edge ahead, but you didn't move the circle on the reel, you now need to make that steeper. So it's between 7 and 9 degrees. Toro says 7, a little bit heavier, because if you do grind that at 5 degrees at the top of that bed, it will cut paper or grass for a day or two. But now the reel hones itself into the center of the top land, rather than contacting the point, if you will, or the cutting edge. So that's why you have to grind that a little bit steeper. So there's, as you kind of chase that bed knife back and forth, those kind of things. What you do find is if whenever you have an aggressive bed knife, it tends to gouge a little bit more, because as the reel is pulling up more aggressively on the grass, the opposite reaction is pulls the cutting unit down. So whenever you're getting into softer turf, wet turf, those kind of things where you can get some gouging, the cutting unit on set down, if it's a triplex or somebody on a walker is dropping a cutting unit pretty abruptly, it kind of bites. And then after a foot or so, it kind of relieves itself and you don't see that, but you get that initial bite because it's pulling the cutting unit down, because you're pulling up on so much grass. And so that's where the extended bed knife came about, as far as pushing that cutting edge closer to the bottom of the reel. So for instance, if you take a DPA cutting unit, let's say today, and you take it out of the box and you measure it, it says 4.5. Okay, degrees. And you find that whenever you drop that cutting unit in turf, whatever your species is, or however firm your turf is or not firm, and you get a gouge. Our recommendation is, and it always has been, put an extended bed knife on, but then insert one spacer. So now we took that from 4.5 and we shoved it down to -0.5. And now we put a spacer and it pulled it right back to like 2.
Ah,
Darn
okay.
near split the
Yeah,
aggressive
yeah, yeah.
and pretty much voila, the the gouging is gone. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah. No,
So
that is awesome. And
it
I
just
really wish, this was published everywhere, in all the operators' manuals.
yeah. Well,
This
I
is really good stuff, and thank
yeah,
you so
and
much for sharing it.
well
Um,
that's
uh, yeah, this
that's
is
quite all
yeah
right.
really good. I want to tell a quick story because that made me think of it. A friend of mine, he's Toro and triplex and greens and standard, setup, so 4.5 degrees behind or whatever. And he got, and I don't remember exactly if he got it from the distributor or not. He ended up with a new mower and it had the spacers on the back. And he also, this club collects clipping volume.
Mhm.
And this was their first mow of the season. So in the spring on bent grass. And they got almost double the amount of clippings with the spacers added. And this was a mistake. They didn't mean to do that. He just didn't, set them the same height. They're both at 140 or whatever it was. They send them out and they're like, hey, why is this mower getting almost twice the amount of clippings? And that's what it was.
Yeah. So it was
I just thought it was, super
pretty aggressive.
interesting.
So it was
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, because
yeah.
it was more aggressive. It was getting more clippings.
Yeah.
And
Right. Right.
but yeah,
As we kind of look at that and the attitude changes, the the circle or the reel itself goes deeper into the profile and starts to cut on an upward sweep. And that's where
mhm,
it tends to really pull in a lot more grass or cut a little bit lower because it's really pulling itself down. It's not as smooth on the turf. It starts to cut the grass blade on a bias rather than more blunt because it's pulling it into the bed on an upward sweep rather than kind of cutting it square. So
mhm,
and that's where you get into the different shadings of sunlight and so on and so forth that can really affect. That's where we used to get into if you take a full size reel versus a worn reel, that you'll get more grass in the basket with a full size reel than a worn reel, even though they're set
mhm,
at the same height of cut. That's because that reel is what we call blade path. It has its ability to reach out a lot further and start to play or process that uncut grass. So it starts to work on that grass to stand as much of it up as possible. And it does a better job than a reel that's worn because it can't reach out as far because it's smaller diameter. The radius is
yeah,
tighter,
yeah,
right?
mhm,
So, but you're going at the same rate of speed if it's triplex. So another quick story is kind of funny. Back in the day, whenever I was working at the distributorship and customers send in a cutting unit that maybe had a broken reel blade or something and didn't have time to repair it or whatever, we'd always measure the reel size immediately before we do anything else. And we'd call the customer and say, hey, this reel's darn near shot, came off your triplex. We put a new reel in it. It's going to cut different. It's just
mhm,
because one, it weighs more, right? It weighs
mhm,
more. Like, for instance, you take an 8 bladed reel compared to 11 bladed reel compared to a 14 bladed reel, there's about a 3 pound difference between an 8 and an 11 and a 3 pound difference between 11 and a 14. So,
mm,
you have to kind of manage all that when you're adjusting heights and so on and so forth to understand it. But you say it's going to cut different because it's going to be a larger diameter reel. And just so you know, and I actually had a technician say to me, well, can you take that new reel and grind her down to the size of that worn reel? And I was like, oh my God, you got to be
uh,
kidding me. But
yeah,
I said, look, it's September, deal with it. And in the wintertime, you can change your reels out or we can help you out with that, however you want to do.
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, you know, back in the days when we used sticks and stones to fix things, we didn't really think about that. But I've always been kind of curious about things. My father, again, being a mechanical engineer and having a full blown shop with milling machines and lathes and all kind of things. He always taught me, to really, really research and process, take a step back. You'd always say, if you're troubled about something, you go to bed at night, wake up the next morning, you're driving to work or whatever, you go, I ain't got the answer to that. And he said, the reason for that is your mind never sleeps. Your mind is
Ah.
always processing. It's always
Mm-hmm.
working. So, and that's happened to me so many times over the years, it'd be go to bed perplexed about something and wake up in the morning and go, wow, I bet if I try that, that's going to take care of it. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times it does, and I'm sure that's happened to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes in the middle of the night, wake
Yeah.
up and say, why didn't I think of that yesterday?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Whatever it is. No,
exactly.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Supercharged course maintenance with Task Tracker, the leading golf course maintenance software in the industry. Built for precision and efficiency, Task Tracker simplifies daily operations, optimizes water usage, and keeps your team on track. With real-time updates and streamlined workflows, it's the essential tool for modern superintendents. Learn more at www.clubessentials.com/task tracker. Let's get back to the episode. That's good. So I want to stay on this topic.
Okay.
And I remember this was quite some time ago. And it's one of your slides in your presentation about a reel becoming more aggressive when it wears. So when the reel diameter gets smaller, that it actually gets more aggressive.
That it all depends on what type of reel it is.
Okay.
So, and it all depends on the manufacturer of the reel. All right. So the standard cutting unit that adjusts from the front, whenever the reel wears, the bend knife becomes more aggressive. Now, how does that happen? Well, when you take a 5-inch reel, brand new, you adjust it up to cuts paper or whatever your measurement is for quality of cut, and you have it set, let's say, at 125 thousandths, an eighth of an inch. The reel, when it's totally shot, is 4.5 inches. So it's a quarter of an inch it came off of the radius, right?
Yep.
Right. So if you never, ever adjusted the height, you would now be cutting at 3/8 of an inch.
Yep.
Right. So as the reel wears, you're constantly bringing the front of the cutting unit down. So as you're bringing the front of the cutting unit down, the cutting edge of that bed knife is moving back further and further and further. Therefore, it gets more aggressive because we're working on a circle, right? So further and further back. So what we've done a lot of calculations in field work. When I started working with Toro as a field operations manager, part of my detail was down in Florida, and it was at the Y World of Sports and the 5 golf courses that they had down in Florida. So Toro did a lot of work with Disney, and a lot of the product was Toro product. So we had a condo down there that we would go down, and different people would be in at different times, but I spent a lot of time down there. And so that's where we started to really look at when reels wear, the aggressiveness, the gouging, and so on. Because in Bermuda, typically the blade is green 1/3 of the way down. So whenever it gouges and so on, and like 419 or whatever, you really see it. Right? Zoyce is a little different, green all the way down. And single strand grass, like bent grass, and even though bent grass is a warm season grass, more tolerated in colder seasons or climates, it's green all the way down to the crown. So having said that, we started to really, really look at the aggressiveness of a cutting unit and the way things work and wear. So having said that, that's on the standard cutting unit. The way that works is it gets more aggressive as the reel gets smaller because you're lowering the front down to match the height of cut that you originally had or desired. With a rear height of cut, like a QA5 John Deere,
Yep.
they lower in the back, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
reel becomes less aggressive as it wears. So with John Deere, you have what they call eccentrics, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
little eccentric shoes on the bed bar that you flip.
Yep.
And when you flip that, it pulls the bed bar back half the distance. So it gives you another shot at using that reel until the reel's worn down to 4.5 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Now with the DPA cutting unit, the DPA cutting unit, Jerry Goldman, he has a patent on that.
Mm-hmm.
That never moves. And the way that is designed is it is the relationship where the axis of the bed bar is and the extension of the high adjustment arms that go up to the little clicker, that whenever that reel starts to wear, that bed knife cutting edge is actually pushed forward. It's up and forward slightly. But now you readjust the cutting unit by lowering it down. So it chases it
Mm-hmm.
right back to where it was. So that constantly is teeter-tottering a little bit forward when she wears, and then you're lowering it back down to the height that you desired. So it pretty much keeps it in alignment pretty much through the life of the reel. So that's something that is really proven out, and it works very, very well.
Yeah, no, that was incredible that they were able to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so since they figured that out and the behind center distance doesn't change much, if any, throughout the life of the reel, does the reel still, the aftercut appearance look different?
Yes.
Because
It does, because of the blade path has changed, right? The diameter of the reel, the ability for that reel to reach out and gather more grass than the smaller diameter reel. So typically you'll get a little lighter green out of it, a little lighter hue out of it. So let me tell you a quick story. Hazeltine, I think it was the year 2000, they had PGA there.
mm-hmm.
Jim Nedin was superintendent there at the time. And I showed up on a Monday, and he knew me, and it's in Minnesota, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "You come with me." So I went with him, took me out to number 12 green. He said, and they were using flexes and flex 21s, right? They're 2120s or newer style, but these are original model flex 21s. And he says to me, "I don't know what that is, but every pass back and forth is light on one side of the path of the cutting unit and darker on the other." He said, "That's got to be gone by Thursday because we go live TV back Thursday." So I went back to the shop and spoke with the equipment manager. I pulled out my rear caliper, and every cutting unit from the left side to the right side, the trailing edge of the reel
Mm-hmm.
was 40 thousandths larger than the leading edge of the reel. Now 40 thousandths, that's diameters, but my depth gauge was only reading 20 thousandths, which you'd kind of almost dismiss, right? But you've got to add that back in. You've got to multiply that by 2. So it's 40 thousandths on the diameter of that reel. So what that was causing is on that reel itself, it was 2 different diameters. The blade path was different from the left side of that reel to the right side of that reel. Even though the height was set exactly the same, the blade path was different. So the reel had more ability to take in more grass on the larger side of that reel than the smaller side of that reel. So, and they just ground all the reels, and they ground them tip to tip. To tip. They didn't have a relief grinder. It's just tip to tip.
Yeah.
And so we went about, first it was in disbelief, and I said, to true these up. So I used the depth gauge, 40,000 or 20,000 air gap on one side of the stone, touch on the other side, brought both dials up until it ground the whole way across, and then took it out in mode. Jim was happy. It was a happy day. So we had to
Mhm.
regrind all the reels, all the cutting units, and they were just done like the week before. But
Wow.
that's where the tip to tip can get you into trouble. Now, if you're mowing at 3/8 of an inch or even a quarter of an inch, you probably never see it. But when you're
Right.
mowing at 85 or 90 thousandths or
Mhm.
100 thousandths. So basically, that started me down a path of research. I've done a lot of research in the field over the years and started me down a path that basically, if we look at a reel, it's 20 thousandths out or more at 100 thousandths or lower, you will see it. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. So I bring up one of my slides, such as that.
I don't. Will you say that again?
So if you're looking at a reel that is out more than 20 thousandths left to right, okay,
Yep.
at 100 thousandths or lower, you will see it. You will see a difference in the color of green across each pass left to right. Now, if it's higher, you're not going to notice it. So the lower you go, the more sensitive things become, right? So,
Right.
yeah. So that's some of the research that I've done, done tons of research on a lot of different things. So ask away.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
know. I wish I knew all the research you've done so I would know better questions to ask.
Oh, no, it's okay.
You
We
know,
can stumble around here a little bit. That's okay.
yeah, because that's something since the aggression fork and measuring behind center distance and those things. I mean, I feel like I've learned more about cutting units in the last year than I have in the first 27 years
Sure.
of my career.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you,
I
and
mean,
you
it's
do,
just amazing.
just one thing leads to another, And that's why
Yeah.
I say, the very first thing that you need to do with a cutting unit is make sure that it's cylindrical. The reel is cylindrical before you do anything else. Because
hmm
one, as far as the taper on the reel is so important whenever you're at micro heights. Very, very important. So it takes the guesswork out, right? So we
hmm
have specs. So you want to make sure that the reel is within spec, which is cylindrical.
hmm
You can't use a parallel plate, table, or roller check, whatever you want to use to square the rollers off, unless the reel is cylindrical. You can't
hmm
parallel a roller on a tapered reel because you're
Right.
going
Yeah.
off the reel itself, right? You're only using the bed knife as a prop to make sure that you're going straight across that circle from left to right. That's what the
hmm
bed knife's doing for you. But the diameter of the reel left to right is so important. So if the reel's tapered, yeah, we can cheat and whatever, put a shim underneath one side of the rear roller, the fixed roller, but that's not really getting anywhere, right?
hmm
You still take that cutting, put it on a perfectly level surface after you adjust the height, it's going to rock and roll in, right? It's
Yeah.
going to tip one side or the other.
What's been your experience on the DPA and it being square? So if the reel's cylindrical, is the frame, have you seen frames get out very often?
Not very often. So there is a tolerance with, it's within 2000s, should be within 2000s as far as the plow bolts, we'll call plow bolts that fit in from the frame into the, inner, the backing plate. So those you almost have to drive in. They're really form fitted, so to speak. So those should be about no more than 2000s out. So whenever everything is clean and you take the rear roller and you fasten it to that frame, that rear roller should pretty much parallel what the axis of the reel is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
the differential is if the reel's cone. So if the reel's cone, now Toro did come up with a couple of things that I wasn't real keen on. One, a 10,000 shim to put between the rear frame and the roller bracket. And they came
Mm-hmm.
out with an eccentric to put on one side.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, if you have to use those things, something's drastically wrong, you
Yeah.
know? So let's find out what the root cause is before we try to put a Band-Aids on something that we really don't know what's going on? Did you drop it off the workbench? Well, that's probably a given then, right? So
Yeah.
wisdom. So maybe
Mhm.
you have to go to that extreme. But at the same time, the cutting units are very well fitted. And I always tell folks too, we have all these springs and so on and so forth on the cutting units, right? We have the little coil spring in the back that with that big flat washer. We
Mhm.
run it down to collapses the spring and back it off a half a turn. It's not scientific. We just
Yep.
do it. So that has what that does, it stops the bed knife from being pushed up into the reel whenever the bed knife's going over a high spot. So if you don't have that tension on that coil spring correct, then the bed knife's going to push up into the reel. It's going to ripen, right? It's going to cause too
Okay.
much friction. If you
Mhm.
have it too tight, I've been to shops where they take an impact and they blow that spring apart. It's kind of like, what did you think that spring was for?
Right,
You know,
right. Yeah.
what are you
Yep.
trying to do here?
Mhm.
But, so we get into more scientific things as far as whenever we look at the little clicks on the adjuster itself. So that adjuster is 7/10 of 1/1000. So Toro, for the last number of years, since about 2016, I think, has provided a 2000 feelers gauge, a 2000 shear. It's 4 inches
Yep.
long, about an inch wide, and is 2/1000 of an inch thick. So it's always been this big question about what is light contact. You can never
Yep.
really achieve it sufficiently with 4-bolt cutting units, or the ones that, we
Uh-huh.
have
Yeah.
ears that you tightened up, loosened.
Mhm.
However, with the DPA cutting unit, it works like this. If you take that 2000 feelers gauge and just kind of swipe it between the reel and the bed knife and get the same amount of friction or drag from left to right side, we could then say that we have a parallel of 2000s across that reel and bed knife, right?
Mhm.
So each click is 7/10 of 1/1000. So if I click it one time with left and right, I'll still get free spin. I only went
Mhm.
7/10. If I click it twice, that's 1.4 thousandths. I may have a little whisper here and there.
Mhm.
If I click it 3 times, that's 2.1 thousandths. That's 1/100,000ths tighter than 2000. That's the
Mhm.
definition of light contact.
So 1/10
Yeah.
is light contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
super,
awesome.
super, so it's just one little degree. Now, that's with a 5-inch reel. With a 7-inch diameter reel, it changes a bit. 2 clicks because the
Ah.
arm is so much higher. If you go 3
Okay.
clicks, we're tightened it. So with a 7-inch diameter reel that you use down in the South, right? 2 clicks. So you're going to use that same 2000 feelers gauge, but you're only going to go 2 clicks, not 3. 5-inch diameter reel, 3 clicks. 7-inch diameter
Okay.
reel, 2 clicks.
That's a new one too for me. I knew about the 3 clicks, but I didn't know that on the 7-inch reel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Right.
Cool stuff, man. Cool.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, it's exciting.
But, I went into this whole study of backlap. And I don't know if you believe in
Yep,
backlapping.
let's
I
do
mean,
it. This is the next thing we need to talk about. I love it. You're just
probably many people out there that don't believe in backlap. I always say, go talk to your grass, right? Talk to the
Mhm.
grass, because the grass ain't happy and anybody happy. Superintendent's blaming it on the technician right off the bat, right?
Mhm.
So, but go talk to your grass. And so I always say to technicians, if you don't have a prism or a high powered microscope. Now I have a 200 power digital microscope that I've used for years and I hook up to my laptop. And so, but lately I just use my high definition phone and I
Mm.
always use the same amount of depth. So I'll take a piece of 2x4 and I'll just lay my phone on the 2x4 and then I'll snap a picture of the turn. So it's always the same distance away from the turf at the same power on my
Okay.
front.
Yeah.
And then you can transport that anywhere, right? Off my
Mm-hmm.
farm. So, but I used to go through this whole thing of hooking up my microscope out on the green and with my laptop and all that. So, but things get simpler. We learn a little bit along the way. But when we talk about backlap, I did this study over in Hawaii. I was over there for 2 weeks working. And people say, "Oh yeah, I bet you were."
Yeah.
Like what?
Working. Yeah.
Every day I was on a different
Yeah.
island, but I was on a lot of different golf courses. And we were looking at quality of cut, and they have what they call kikuya over there, which is very, very tough to cut. Very, very tough. And so there's kikuya greens, and what we had were mowers that were just sharpened. And then we had mowers that had some hours on, like 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, those kind of. And so we took mowers just sharpened and we took it out, we mowed. And what I always do is take a blue dot of paint so that I'm taking the picture in the exact same spot every day. So if you ever wanted to do a test after you sharpen a mower, you can go ahead on certain greens, go ahead and put a blue dot at different spots and just ID those greens, ID those spots, and then take a picture every day. And whenever you see something change as far as the quality of cut, that's microscopic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's probably still not seen by standing up and looking down at the turf, but microscopically things are changing. So let me help you understand that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
So whenever we cut grass at any point in time, you cut a branch off a tree, anything in that world produces hydrogen peroxide. And
Okay.
hydrogen peroxide rushes to that wound to seal and heal. When I was a kid and I would get a cut or something, my mom would take hydrogen peroxide and pour it on that cut and it would foam up like crazy because it's shooting oxygen in that area. Now, plants are very, very smart, right? So if my mom put the hydrogen peroxide on today and said, "Oh, it worked pretty good, let's put it on tomorrow," and the next day, it would become infected. I'd have to go to the doctor, get something to take care of that. But plants are very smart. They exchange with the hydrogen peroxide whenever they're wounded one time. It doesn't know if the cut is clean, crystal clear, or ragged. So we talk about clean cutting or shredding, right? So shredding begins microscopic, and that's why I use a high-powered phone to see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So over in Hawaii, we did that same practice, and we found that after about 10 hours of mowing, we started to see shredding with the plants. And that was adjusting properly, but it was about 10 hours of mowing. Microscopically started seeing shredding. So we took and we backlapped for 1 minute, went back up and mowed. Shredding was gone. So it gives the plant a better accuracy or better as far as utilizing that hydrogen peroxide that's presented to the wound so it seals and heals versus, keep mowing until it doesn't want to cut paper. That's 40, 50 hours past the time that plant has saw some shredding or wounding. So I would say, go talk to your turf, proper tools. So if that sets you up into a world of backlapping once a week for 1 or 2 minutes, and their disease rate goes down tremendously over the year, and everybody's happier, including the grass, right? Why not do it?
Yeah. No, why not?
So, but if you're happy with what you've got and nobody's complaining and no one's ever challenged you, then continue to do what you're doing. It's funny. I worked 17 masters down at Augusta. They backlap their greens mowers every time they go out.
Yep.
So during the tournament in the morning, we had 54 walkers.
Wow.
And I was
That's a
the
lot of
guy that
walkers.
did the back lap, right? And
Mhm.
some had auto back laps. Some you had to use the little fully back lapping machine or
Mhm.
simplex or whatever
Yeah,
they have.
yeah.
In the evening, we had 18 mowers that went up because they were just mowing green,
Mm-hmm.
still backlit. So we used 120 grit. I had a 5-gallon bucket. So all that backlapping for 7 days, at the end of that week, that long week, I still had an inch or two backlapping compound in the bottom of that because you just dip in and you rake it across a couple of times. You keep the brush on the reel so that it's aggravating the cutting edge. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever backlapped valves on an engine, but if you
Right.
backlap
Yeah.
valves on an engine, right, you put the compound on the seat or on the valve itself, and you take your tool and you go back and forth with it. It gets quiet. You pick it up and you drop it again. You know, add more compound. And
Right.
that's
Right.
where you're keeping the brush on the reel to keep the grit to the cutting edge. That's when it does the backlapping. And that's why you only need to backlap 1 or 2 minutes. And if you use any more than two dips on a reel, that's overdue.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Just wasteful.
and back in the day, Augusta National had express dual grind. So they didn't relief grind. They spun ground, but they still backlap every single day. Fairway mowers, they backlap 2 to 3 times a week. During the tournament, it was 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Every day they backlap mowers. It's just their process. And, keeps the disease pressure down because, we're allowing that hydrogen peroxide to do its job.
So 1 to 2 minutes.
1 to 2 minutes, but keep the brush applied. Keep the brush.
Right. Keep the brush on there. I do think that is one of, and this is my personal opinion, but I do think backlapping is misunderstood. I think you've done an excellent job of explaining it.
Yeah, it's
but
not to resharpen, a reel. One of the big things that we found with backlapping, because people would say, it seems like it cuts us okay in the shop and you get it out. You've got to remove the burr from the front edge of that, back from that bed knife. And I use a bed knife buddy. And I think Active Products makes that bed knife buddy. You're familiar with that? The bed knife buddy?
Yeah, I am.
I don't care if you use, now my bed knife buddy I've had probably for 8 or 10 years. I've never changed the file. I've never changed the file.
Really?
I don't use it to sharpen anything. I used to take the burr off. A bunch of files, I'll sell them to you.
Oh, that's good.
I've never changed the file because I don't use it to sharpen anything. I use it to take the burr off. 1 or 2 swipes across, we're done. And now you adjust. So you're adjusting light contact metal to metal, not light contact metal of the reel to a burr. So what we learned when I was at Toro is if you just backlap and adjusted the reel on a fairway mower, let's say, when within probably 1 or 2 fairways, you had to readjust because the burr has now worn off and now you have a gap and now you're getting that shredding rather than cutting cleanly. So why not do it while it's in the shop? Then you wind up getting 9 fairways out of it, before you need to readjust. Those kind of, the other thing is too, it's so crazy. When I was a kid, we used gang mowers to mow fairways, right? Gang mowers cut the grass, threw it out the back. We're done, right? We sharpened the gang mowers maybe twice a year, once a year for sure. It lasted a whole year. And people would say, now we're using these lightweight mowers and we have to grind them all the time. Why is that? So I asked a question. Do you forward throw? Yeah. Do you catch? No. It's just way too much labor. All right. So you're recutting that grass, depending on how far it's throwing it, 5 to 15 times. So you've got 5 to 15 times more reel wear on those 2 components, the bed knife and the reel, than you had with the the good old fashioned gang mower and threw it out.
That's interesting. And I've never thought about that like that. And we use a Toro gang mower, 1988 model, to mow rough. That's our primary rough mower. We got a couple 3100s to do the trim work. But
yeah, so you
and
have
I
the
love
old
that
Real
thing.
Master, huh? Your old
Yeah,
Real
a Real
Master.
Master. And I am proud I converted it electric over hydraulic valve.
Wow.
So the
Yeah.
operator doesn't have to, reach behind the tractor and, raise and lower cutting units. But like you said, I grind it once a year in the winter and I don't touch it again. And we do have a really good operator and he knows how to keep the cutting units adjusted and it cuts all summer long.
The other thing is with cutting units, like if you have a 5-plex fairway mower and you open up the rear doors, right? So you're discharging to the back. I've always gotten comments from customers, and I'll know where they're going with it as soon as they make the statement. And they'll say to me, these rear cutting units are a pain. I've got to adjust them like twice as much as the front ones. They wear down a lot quicker. And I'll say, are you operating your fairway mower with the doors open, that you're just throwing it to the back? Well, the front cutters are cutting the grass once. The rear cutters are recutting that grass 5 to 15 times. That's why they're wearing out so much faster, and they need to be adjusted constant.
Yeah.
Yep. So
No,
let's do it to all of them if we're going to do it,
Yeah.
Throw forward. Yeah. So it's just some things that we ran into whenever we started with the lightweight mowing that we never, anticipated. So there were, back in the 70s, there were just a boatload of people that were manufacturing their own lightweight mowers out of greens mowers and adding extra cutting units to them. And some were pretty unique in the way they were trying to do it. Pretty wild.
Well, yeah, I remember having a 5100. This was late 90s.
Yeah, 5100.
Was that one of the first?
Pre was 223.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was a Series 2 size mower with a 23 horsepower engine. That's where it came from, 223.
Okay.
And then the 5100 was like a 223. Then I can't remember if we put turbocharge on that or not, but then it came out with a 5200, which was a little different predecessor. And then it came out with a 5300 that had a turbocharged engine on it, all those kind of things. Yeah. A lot of history.
Fun times.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
Yep. Yeah, and I remember if we got very much rain mowing 419 Bermuda, that we couldn't use the 5100.
No.
If we missed 3 days or 4 days.
Well, see, the problem is there again, like whenever you're in warm season grass, from even Zoysia kind of Zoysia is tough. Zoysia is very tough. When I started playing with Zoysia, as far as the density of Zoysia, when you're mowing on Zoysia, the guys are constantly playing with the steering wheel, trying to keep it on track because the cutting unit floating across the Zoysia. When you're on a golf cart on Zoysia, it feels like you're on ice, right? Yeah. So it's so dense. But so with the 5-inch diameter reel, you don't quite have the torque that you need, that the 7-inch diameter reel provides. Plus, the larger reel gives you better blade path. It reaches out further and starts to work on that complexity of the 419, right? It's a very complex grass versus a single strand, cool season grass, bluegrass, ryegrass, different species like that, compared to ones that look like little Christmas trees, right? So in your 419. So it's very complex. So the heavier mower weighs 147 pounds versus 117, plus the ability for that reel to reach out much further and start to play in the grass and process that grass is a benefit, a huge benefit. Plus the torque of it being to cut through that. That's why you had to mow so much more often with the 5-blade 5100 or 5-inch
Yeah.
reel. It just didn't have the capacity to really work that Bermuda. Yeah.
Well, our other fairway mower at the time was a 450D.
Oh yeah, 450.
And it did have the capacity to mow
It
the
was
thick stuff.
the nightmare and a half as far as the reel adjusting down to the bed.
Yes. And that center cutting unit.
Oh, yeah.
Adjusting the center cutting unit. Oh, yeah, nightmares.
Crazy stuff.
Tonight, thinking about
A lot of
that,
history
but
there.
yeah. Well, one question I just thought of, what about top face relief angle? Is there any magic there other than what the manufacturer recommends?
Well, what I always recommend is this. It all depends on what we're speaking to. But on a fairway mow, for instance, Toro came out with a number of years ago. Originally, the 5510s, 5610s, they all had bend knives on with the inserts as far as the Edge Max inserts. And we ground those to 5 and 5, 5 in the front, 5 on the top. And so in 2016, I think it was, Toro changed the top angle to 5 on the front and 10 on the top. So, and that was to give it better discharge. In other words, so that it released the grass quicker, no drag of that grass on the bed knife, just minor things, but it helped. So they went across the board, 5 on the front, 10 on the top. No matter what fairway knife you look at, it is 10 on the top, 5. So that's good. But the problem is that if you have to regrind that knife and you regrind the top to 10 again, you will be deep into the gullet. You will be deep into the gullet. You throw the knife away. So my recommendation is the second time you grind it, you grind 5 on the top, not 10. 5 on the top, 5 in the front. Because the original adjustment was 5. The original measurement, or the way we adjusted that to grind, was 5 and 5. So if you want to get a second chance with that bend knife, the second chance is reduce the top angle from 10 to 5. Maintain that 5 in the front. So like if we look at greens more, if it was 15 degrees in the front and a fairway mower is only 5 degrees in the front, with 15 degrees in the front with a greens mower that we're mowing at 1/8 of an inch or lower, we want to get that bed knife out of the way as quick as possible so that it's not causing any disruption to the plant as it's trying to be taken into the reel. So if we boxed that, or we went 5 degrees on the front, the bottom edge of that bed knife pushed some of that grass over that's kind of leaning away from the reel, and it wouldn't have a chance to get cut. So we try to get that away as quick as possible. With a fairway mower, we have some body there, but we're cutting higher too. We're cutting 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 inch or whatever. So we can have a little more body there with that bed knife, so it doesn't have to be as steep. And again, we're trying to hold that hardened edge in there as well, because that's silver soldered in, that D2 steel that makes the Edge Max bed knife, that's silver soldered in there. So we don't want to thin that by having too steep of angles, and now it winds up winding itself out of there, get worn down, that kind of thing.
It seems like, and I'm sorry, this is just the way my brain works. I jump around a lot. Do you think we get less rifling now than we used to? I don't think rifling is as much of a problem as it used to be.
Yeah. I don't think that rifling is as big an issue. I think if anything, people would become a little bit gun shy of over tightening the reel and the bed knife. So that's why there's some exact measurements for that with the Toro product, with the clickers, that kind of thing. But all that has to work very fluidly, right? I mean, I've been out in California where they're using reclaimed water and they're adjusting their deep cutting units the reel to bed knife adjustment with a breaker bar because they
Wow.
can't get
Okay.
them to move, right? We'd have to
Uh,
dismantle them completely. And you have this dissimilar metals, right? You have aluminum,
mhm.
brass, and you have an alloy that all this is making like battery, corrosion
Mhm.
compound
Yeah,
inside
yeah.
inside of the adjuster. So I literally had to drive them out with like a 2-pound sledgehammer and an awl and
Wow.
just clean them up, put them back together.
Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
do like to see those come apart once a year and put just a touch of anti-seize in
Mhm.
the mechanism because it has to work very fluidly, right? It has to send that click all the way down to the cutting edge of the bed
Yeah, right.
of 7/10 of a thousand.
Mhm.
And that's where we get into torquing the bed axis bolts correctly.
Mhm.
With a fairway mower, they should be 30 foot-pounds. A greens mower, they should be 20 foot-pounds. That nut should never be tight. And
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, early on the Flex 21s, we had a steel washer and a plastic washer inserted between the bed bar and the frame on both sides.
Mhm.
And that was sometimes inconsistent. Some were tight, some were loose. And if you got ones that were tight, you usually went and pried to get it in there. And what would happen, it was wind up flexing the bed bar. And so
Mhm.
now you grind a reel, you grind a bed knife, your precision grinders, you put it together and it doesn't cut in the middle or it doesn't cut in the edge.
Mhm.
So we went through this campaign of originally engineering said, get rid of all the internal washers. And us guys in the field said, whoa, wait a minute. Get rid of all the washers, customers are going to see this huge old gap and they're going to want to tighten it down to get rid of the
Mhm.
gap. They're going to want to breaking thing. They said, okay, well, let's just leave the plastic washers in. And so it's just kind of a metal thing, but they don't really do anything. But
Mhm.
just put them in there, they'll take up some space. So today, anytime I see DPA cutting unit with a steel and a plastic washer internal, I always throw the steel washer away
Okay.
because
That's
we're
good to
not
know too.
interested in that.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that we're using the nuts on the outside, that we have a steel washer and a plastic washer, and we have the nuts on the outside, we always say at the end of the day, you want to be able to turn those steel washers, right?
Mhm.
So what we're trying to accomplish by that is if we look at the forks of bed bar coming up through the adjusters, that what we call a double D, looks like a double D, black double D that the forks go around.
Mhm.
If that is misadjusted, leaning one side to the other, what it'll do is that fork will now press against that double D adjuster. And because of the length of that fork, it becomes a mechanical advantage. And whenever you assemble that and it's in that condition, it causes the bed bar to bow one way or the other.
Mm.
So all we're trying to do is drag that bed bar from one side to the other to get the double Ds so that there's play in the double Ds. You can flop those double Ds in between the forks. And that's where you're going to snug up the nuts. You can still turn the steel washers, but not be able to move the bed bar to right.
Mhm.
So that is a very, very important adjustment. And I often find people that complain that it's not cutting in the middle or whatever after I adjusted that bed bar is shifted to one side or the other to an extreme, and it's causing the fork to lay heavy on one side of that double D adjuster where the clickers are up top, and now causing the bed bar to bow one way or the other. The
Ah.
same the same thing applies if you tighten those nuts down too tight. It can cause some disruption with the plane of the bed bar. So
Mhm.
that's why we're always looking for that sweet spot, if you will. We want to drag that bed bar to the point where the double D's up top, where the forks go through, have a little flip flop. They're not rubbing on one side or the other. And we want to make sure that the nuts are tight enough, but yet loose enough to where that you can go ahead and turn that steel washer. But first, we want to make sure that the bolts are torqued to the 20 or 30 foot.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I
you want
mean,
to use,
yeah.
you want to make sure you use anti-seize. I've been to so many facilities that are very upset because they had to buy a brand new bed barn because they've run that bolt in and out X number of times. And with cast iron, if you don't use a lubricant of some kind, cast iron microparticles of cast iron flake off the threads every time you tighten. So
Ah,
eventually it strips out. So
yeah.
it's, I asked them, what kind of lubricant? What are you talking about? Put together dry. I don't want any lubricant on my turf. No, a little bit of anti-seize, allows the friction to be less. And now we don't have microparticles of cast iron flaking off.
Right, right. No, that's excellent. Yeah, I had a customer when I worked for Jerry Pate. He said, I grind these reels and the bed knives, I put them together and they cut great in the middle. I can't ever get them to cut on the ends. I said, how tight do you tighten the jam nuts? Oh, I run it in with a 1/2 inch impact.
Oh,
Okay, let's back off on that and
yeah,
see how it cuts.
yeah,
And, sure enough, that was it. But again, just not looking in the operator's manual because I
sure.
know that's information in the operator's
Yeah.
manual.
A lot of the information that I bring up as well is in the operator's manuals, and perhaps some of it isn't. It's just kind of trial and error in the field and doing it over and over and over again for as long as I've been doing it. That's
Uh-huh. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
Well, maybe when I get to 62 years, I'll have half your knowledge. That's all I
no,
can hope for.
I'm sure you'll
That's
surpass me.
no, no, no.
Today it's pretty amazing with the kids, but they're still looking for an app for everything.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just got to get down and do it, got to be an app for that, It's like,
Right,
well,
right, right,
I've
yeah.
created a lot of apps, a lot of calibration apps for sprayers and different things and for clip rates and for blade paths and looking at, whenever we talk about the diameter of the reel, there's what we call a tip speed that's involved, right? So
Mhm.
the tip speed. So for instance, if we're looking at a rotary blade and if you have a 27-inch rotary blade and that rotary blade is running at 15,000 feet per minute. And we talk
Mhm.
feet per minute because if it picks something up and hails it across the room, how fast and how far is it going to throw it? That equals 200 mile an hour. So 27-inch blade spinning at 2,500 RPM equals 200 mile an hour
Okay.
tip speed. If I take a 21-inch blade on a 21-inch mower and run the engine at 3,200 RPM, that equals 200 mile an hour. So the larger the diameter, the slower the RPM to equal a smaller diameter will have more RPM to get to that same point. So whenever we're
Mhm.
looking at a reel that has tip speed differential of one side that's larger than the other, right? Its ability to transfer that, it's trying to run at two different, it's almost like if you take a roller and you go into a turn with a cutting unit, right? The inside of that roller is trying to go faster, or the inside of that roller is trying to go slower. The outside of the roller is trying to go faster. And that's why they came up with the split rollers and so on, because it's constantly fighting. Now it's causing some aggravation to the turf and
Yep.
aggravation to the cutting unit itself, right? It wants to
Mhm.
go straight. So whenever we're looking at blade path and the differential in tip speed with the same RPM, we've got a little differential going on there. So now it winds up resulting in the look of the turf being, maybe a little more bruised than on the
Mhm.
opposite side of that cutting it. And some of it's extreme. Some of it's extreme. I had Tony Leonard, who is the director of the fields for the Eagles football team. I worked with them for years. So I worked with the NFL as well in Major League Baseball on their fields, so on. And so one year Tony calls me up and he has 5610s, okay, the
Okay.
larger throwing mower.
Yep.
And he had them for probably 3 or 4 years. And he calls me up and he says, dead of winter, hey, Jim, I just sharpened my reels and bed knives. And I got one up here on the tape, and I can't, he's the director. He's not super mechanically inclined, but his mechanics are working with it. And so we can't get it to cut. He said, it'll cut on one side, but the other side, he said, I can't even get to pull up. He said, it's not even close, maybe a 16th of an inch away. He said, I thought maybe his bed bar was damaged or whatever. Brand new bed bar, put it in, bed bar, same thing. And I said, did you drop it off the workbench or what? He goes, no, you don't understand. I got 2 mowers. I got 10 cutting units. They're all doing the same thing. Oh,
What?
I said, okay. So from where I live and where the Philadelphia Eagles, about 100 miles. So I said, tell you what, how about, one day this week, whatever. I think it was called me on a Monday, Wednesday, I went up. So I pulled out the Vermeer caliper. On the radius, they were 50 thousandths differential from one side to the other. So the reel was 100 thousandths smaller on the leading side compared to the following side.
Wow.
And they were doing the tip to tip. No relief grind, just tip to tip. And so I said, Tony, these reels are so far out of spec. Well, what are we going to do? I said, well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put it in the grinder. I'm going to give myself 50 thousandths air gap on this side. I'm going to touch the stone on this side. I'm going to turn the dial, and it's going to grind a little bit, nothing, grind a little bit, nothing. And eventually, it's going to grind a whole reel out, and we're going to put her back together. And that's what we did. We just dropped the bed knife right on the reel, never even tightened up, the forks, and it cut the whole way across. And he says, well, it was an hour and a half it took me to grind out that reel. An hour and a half.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
There were 11 blades. There were 11 blades, 7-inch diameter reels. He looks at me and he says, well, you got 9 more to do. I said, no, I don't. I sure hope you pay attention. I'm out of here.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that is
lots of crazy stories,
Yeah, that's crazy. 100 thousandths out. That's
it was after 3 or 4 years of just tip grinding, touch to touch, left rubber, paying attention to it.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
You got a different set of grinders today.
Okay. Yeah.
Green
that
ones.
doesn't surprise me. Yeah, the green ones. Yep. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I could go on all night, I think. This is so good. It's
a little guy,
no, I love it though. I do. I love it. I would like to do this again.
Okay.
Give it a month or two, and I'll probably come up with some more questions too.
All right.
But yeah, I think we're in an hour and 48 minutes right now.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is plenty good. We'll put a bow on this episode.
Okay. That's
reconvene again. But thank you so much for being a guest. And I would like to do some rapid fire real quick.
Sure.
What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is Christmas Vacation.
I love it.
I
just watched it too.
Every single year. Drop in another, the Cranks, watch that too, Christmas Story, all those things. But Christmas Vacation, laugh like it was the first time I ever saw it every time I see it. It's just crazy.
I know, it is. Yes, it is a classic for sure. What would be your last meal?
Chicken cacciatore.
Oh, all right. Bring it.
Yeah, it's crazy. My wife makes chicken cacciatore like you wouldn't believe. I mean, every Christmas Eve, that's what she makes me for dinner. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Awesome.
After 37 years, it's been good.
That's good. That's good stuff. What are you most proud of besides your family?
I would honestly say, I think, the surprise to me whenever I got the Edwin Budding Award. Because I didn't, we just do what we do every day, right? And not really think about people recognizing what you do.
Yeah.
So that was a real thrill for me whenever GCSA called, that's
awesome. And you deserve it too. I mean, just think about all you've done for this industry and all you've given back. And I know you've been down here to Georgia to speak for us and didn't charge a dime. I mean, that goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, it's all been fun. I've done 102 major tournaments in my career.
Wow.
Yeah. Shinnecock Hill in 18 was my 100th, and John Jennings is the superintendent there, and the USGA kind of had a little recognition for me. I was shocked
Oh,
to know
nice.
that they kept all those records. But
That's awesome.
yeah, I did 2 more after that. I did the BMW at Caves Valley and the Curtis Cup at Marion. And so John wants me to come back in 26 and do the next U.S. Open with him again up at Shinnecock. And
Awesome.
I'll probably be doing Caves this year as far as the BMW is back there again. So,
Okay.
But I'm slowing down, you know.
Yeah. Well, I hope to see you at Shinnecock.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I was talking to Rob Renner,
Yeah.
and he's across the street, right?
Yeah.
At National.
Yeah.
And he's like, you got to come up for the tournament. I said, you let me know. I'm going to try to come. I'm going to try to make
absolutely.
that. That'd be so much
fun.
fun.
It's a good time. I mean, you work your butt off, of course, you know, but
it's worth it. I tell everybody, I've always promote volunteering here on the podcast at tournaments if you get a chance, and you get way more out of it than you put in. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I mean, you make along the way.
A lot of people you meet, you never know, you know, all of a sudden you're in need or you get a call from someone. So it's great. It's a very, very good community. You know, it's a small knit community. What we do. Right? But you know, it's all I know. It's all I know.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're a part of it for sure. And thanks again for being on, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay. Well, thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to the Real Turf Techs podcast. I hope you learned something today. Don't forget to subscribe. If you have any topics you would like to discuss or you'd like to be a guest, find us on Twitter at Real Turf Techs. See you bye.